Good morning, everyone. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be with you this morning, to be able to share with you wherever you're watching from in your homes and continue on our Rebuild series. I think it's probably been said multiple times this year, but, I'm going to say it again. 2020 was a rough year, right? I mean, even the start of 2021 was pretty rough. I remember when we first started to hear about COVID-19 last year, I was pretty convinced that it wasn't going to reach us all the way over here in Norfolk. I mean, who comes to Norfolk? It wasn't going to get here. And I thought, even if it does reach the UK, it'll probably hit London, but we'll be okay over here in Norfolk. I was very wrong, evidently. And, not only were we navigating through this all of a sudden global pandemic, but we also had a global awakening to the systemic and institutionalized racism that Black people face. Following the murder of George Floyd in America, conversations about racism were reignited across the world, including here in the UK. Suddenly, everyone was talking about race. Everyone was talking about racism all the time. It was in the news, it was on social media. Almost every conversation I had during that time with friends, family, colleagues were either about one, COVID-19, or two, racism. And I was sad. I was sad that it took the death of another Black man to raise awareness of a problem that we've been facing for centuries. I was also angry at the world for dismissing or refusing to acknowledge the institutionalized nature of racism. And alongside that, I was working as a junior doctor in the front line of COVID wards, knowing that this was a condition that was killing Black and other ethnic minority people at a disproportionate rate. Across this time, the joy of being a Black person was being sucked away. I remember going out to the shops and being more aware than usual about the looks that I was getting. I remember being more scared than usual about what people would say or do to me because of the color of my skin. And this is a fear that I've dealt with my entire life, but it was definitely heightened in the peak of the protests last year. I remember the conversations regarding race that I was having and the varying reactions from friends and from colleagues and family members. It was exhausting. I forgot what I enjoyed about life. I forgot what I enjoyed about being a Black female and about a junior doctor, a career that I wanted to do my entire life. All the joy I had about being a Black junior doctor was being replaced with fear and anxiety. I was heartbroken. I felt that my joy in life had gone, and I wasn't sure how I was going to get it back. I wasn't sure how I was going to rebuild joy in my life when it felt like I was in the midst of one of the worst times in my life so far. Whether you can relate to my 2020 or not, I'm sure we've all felt that way at some point. I'm sure we've all faced tough times and difficult situations, and in those times, joy seems like a far, far away prospect. Some of you can relate directly to the pain that I've described, the exhaustion and fear of what might happen to you because of the color of your skin. Despite all the joy that is found in your culture, when it's threatened in such a way, it's so much easier to focus on all the negativity than all the joyful things. I mean, how do we find joy in being Black when you're continuously portrayed as dangerous, as criminal, as angry, and the list goes on and on and on? How can you stay joyful when Black pain is everywhere that you look? For those of you that can relate to my experience, this might be bringing up a lot of current or past hurt, and for that I apologize, and I would encourage you to reach out to a friend to talk it through. However, I'm aware that a lot of you listening today wouldn't be able to relate to my experience at all, but perhaps you have felt joy disappear from your life in the past year or so. Maybe the stress of a global pandemic has stolen your joy. Maybe being in and out of lockdown has been extremely difficult and disheartening for you. Perhaps that's because of loneliness. Perhaps that's because of loss or lack of employment, physical or mental health struggles. Maybe you've actually enjoyed the break lockdown has given you from the rest of life. Maybe you've enjoyed working from home and the prospect of going back into the office does not fill you with joy at all. Perhaps you found comfort in church online and you've enjoyed being in the comfort of your own home, and the thought of coming back to church in person and being in this building, in this space again is daunting. Or maybe you felt the opposite way completely. you haven't been able to enjoy church online and you felt disconnected from church and from God and from your relationship with God. Throughout this past year, whatever challenge or difficulty you face, maybe you've noticed that your joy in life has been slipping away. You know, before I go any further, I just want to clarify that when I'm talking about joy, I'm talking about this state of great delight, elation, or pleasure that is deeper than being happy. Nobody is happy all the time, and that is okay. It is okay not to be okay. A very good friend of mine, you'll know her as Dr. Helena Temple, has done an incredible TED Talk on that topic, and I would highly recommend you watch it. And you know, for anyone that is dealing with sadness to the point of having depression or anxiety, I would encourage you to reach out to people that you're close to and to seek help from your GP. But what I want to address here today when it comes to joy is different, and I believe that we can find the answer in the Bible. And for those of you that might not call yourself a Christian, or maybe you've never read the Bible before, I just want to encourage you to stick with me. Let's go on this journey together, because I believe there is something for everyone in this message. So, what do we do when we've lost our joy, when all seems lost, when your joy is gone? How do you get it back? I mean, is it even possible to be joyful in the midst of a storm? Is it even possible to be joyful in the midst of darkness? You know, as I said, I think it's helpful to look at the Bible to answer these questions, and I'd like us to learn from a man named Paul. So Paul is someone who went through a lot, like a lot. He went from being a man who persecuted Christians to playing one of the most crucial roles in spreading the gospel. This is a man who'd been imprisoned, he'd been shipwrecked 3 times, faced multiple threats on his life. There are 6 occasions in Acts alone detailing times where Paul's life was threatened. Yet he continued to rejoice, he continued to have joy. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 25 to 26 gives us a good glimpse into the kind of things that Paul went through. He says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. That is a lot of danger. But despite everything Paul went through, he continued to have joy. In his letter to the church in Philippi, which is the book of Philippians, Paul talks a lot about rejoicing. And to rejoice means to take delight in something or someone. And in this letter, Paul is essentially expressing his gratefulness for how kind they've been to him. And you know, Paul's consistent posture of joy always astounds me, considering what he went through. In fact, the passage that we're about to read in Philippians, Paul wrote whilst under house arrest, whilst being imprisoned in Rome. So we're going to read from Philippians chapter 4 from verses 10 to 13 in the Amplified translation. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that now at last you've renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned about me before, but you had no opportunity to show it. Not that I speak from any personal needs, for I have learned to be content and self-sufficient through Christ. Satisfied to the point where I'm not disturbed or uneasy, regardless of my circumstances. I know how to get along and live humbly in difficult times, and I also know how to enjoy abundance and live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing life, whether well-fed or going hungry, whether having an abundance or being in need. I can do all things which he has called me to do, through him who strengthens and empowers me to fulfill his purpose. I am self-sufficient in Christ's sufficiency. I am ready for anything and equal to anything through him who infuses me with inner strength and confident peace. Wow. So, there are a couple of things that I want to draw out from these verses, and the first one being, learn how to be content regardless of your circumstances. Paul learned how to be content despite everything that he was going through. And as we have read, he was going through a lot. Some of his circumstances were pretty awful. And what I love about this verse is that he learned to be content. He learned to have joy despite the storm that surrounded him. It didn't just happen just like that, but he acquired his joy through his challenges. If being content or having joy is something that we can learn, then it's safe to say that we can relearn it and we can rebuild it in our life once it's gone. Dwelling in sadness or being fixated on a challenge or on a challenging situation doesn't make the situation any easier, doesn't make it go away. In fact, it just makes you more sad or angry or frustrated. Whereas remaining joyful through a tough time helps to lift your spirit, and this enables you to get through. If we look at Paul's example, he was rejoicing at the fact that the Philippians were thinking of him and had sent him gifts. Now, it was great that they were thinking of him and that they were able to express that concern from him, but Paul did not rely on this to experience joy. His content or his joy in life came from something much deeper. Paul did not wait to be free and out of prison to express his joy. He rejoiced whilst imprisoned. He was able to see through the pain of his circumstances and be content to the point where he felt peace. How often do we say things like, well, when I have this job, then I'll be happy. Or when I achieve this grade, then I'll feel fulfilled. Or when the pandemic is over, then I'll be joyful again. What if we could learn to get our joy back regardless of our circumstances, just like Paul? What if we didn't have to wait until everything was going our way? What if we could learn to rebuild joy, not just to the point where we felt a little bit happy, but to the point where we have peace, just like Paul did? So, on to my second point. How did Paul achieve this joy? How did he learn to be content through any circumstance? Paul didn't rely on things going his way to have joy. He counted on his faith in Jesus. You might be thinking it's impossible to learn how to be joyful during the worst time of your life. And if we were going through this alone, you might be right. However, Paul gives us the secret of facing life, which is my second point, the secret of facing life. He's given us the key to enjoying life, no matter how much or how little we have. He's given us a solution to finding joy in the midst of storm. The answer is Jesus. The secret of facing life is knowing that we are not going through it alone. The secret of facing life is acknowledging that we do not need to do it in our own strength. Paul was able to have joy, not by focusing on what he had or didn't have, but by focusing on Jesus. He rebuilt joy in the midst of darkness by focusing on what was eternal rather than what was temporary. I'll say that again. He rebuilt joy in the midst of darkness by focusing on what was eternal rather than what was temporary. The same is possible for us. No matter what we are facing, we can do all things through him who strengthens and empowers us. You can do all things because Jesus is enough. You are enough because Jesus is enough. As it says in verse 13, I can do all things which he has called me to do through him who strengthens and empowers me to fulfill his purpose. I am self-sufficient in Christ's sufficiency. I am ready for anything and equal to anything through him who infuses me with inner strength and confident peace. What a relief it is that we don't have to fight our battles in life alone. What a relief it is that we can be strengthened and empowered by Jesus to do all things. Not only can we face the seemingly impossible, but we can do it with inner strength and confident peace. The secret of being able to experience true joy in the midst of pain is knowing that God has got you. A few years ago, when I was still in medical school, I decided to take a year out of my medical degree and study and do a different degree in a year in London. Wild, I know. And, I was incredibly excited about this opportunity once I got accepted in a position at a university in London, but I was also really sad about leaving Norwich after having built up, some amazing friendships, after getting really involved at Proclaimers. I wasn't sure whether leaving for a year was the right thing to do. I was conflicted about my decision to the point where I almost pulled out. And one night, I remember praying over my decision. I felt God say to me, Esther, you've got this. I've got you, so you've got this. I've got you, so you have got this. And, I knew this was a word from God, as in that moment, I burst out into tears. I felt peace and joy about my decision. No matter what is going on in your life, God has got you, so you have got this. So how can we apply this to our day-to-day lives? How do we rebuild joy? My first point is, come back to the source of joy. Jesus is our source of joy. In John chapter 17, verse 13, Jesus is praying to God and he says this, But now I am coming to you, and I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may experience my joy made full and complete and perfect within them, filling their hearts with my delight. You know, sometimes when we feel overwhelmed by the weight of our difficult circumstances, we look to find comfort or happiness in the world, whether that be through relationships, through food, through alcohol, through social media, validation, rather than looking to Jesus. All of these things may provide happiness, but this happiness is fleeting. Through Jesus, we can experience a joy that is unlike any other, a joy that is full, complete, and perfect, a joy that fills our hearts with delight. So this week, I want to encourage you to remind yourself that Jesus is your source of joy. Maybe you want to set yourself a daily reminder on your phone that says, smile, Jesus is my source of joy. Perhaps you want to look at yourself in the mirror every day and say, I can do all things through him who strengthens me and empowers me. Perhaps you want to write a note saying, God's got me, so I've got this. And you want to stick it somewhere that you can see it every day. Keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus rather than on your circumstances for you may look like just dedicating some time every day to pray and to hear from God. Whatever it looks like for you, I want to encourage you that you can rebuild joy in your life by coming back to the source, by focusing on Jesus. Focus on his love and let that love fill you with joy. You know, perhaps you wouldn't call yourself a Christian or you wouldn't say that you have a relationship with God. Can I encourage you that Jesus is here for you? His grace is sufficient for you, and you too can have joy through him. Maybe you felt disconnected from Jesus this past year. Perhaps through all the challenges you felt your relationship with Jesus slip away. I want to encourage you too that Jesus is there for you with arms open wide, ready to receive you. And at the end of this message, I'm going to lead us all in a prayer to connect with Jesus, whether that be to connect with him for the first time or whether that be to reconnect with him. So my first point is come back to the source of joy. And my second point is to share the joy. You know, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, one of the things I have struggled with the most is the constant display of black pain, the relentless social media posts about the deaths of black people. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not saying that we shouldn't be aware of what's happening in the world. I'm not saying that we shouldn't understand the effects of systemic racism. I am not saying that we should be ignorant or bury our heads in the sand. But the pain of black people should not be our sole focus. The pain of black people should not be the only thing that we see when there is so much joy in being black and not enough of that joy is being spread. We can't rebuild joy in our lives if we only point out if we're only focused on our pain. We can't help our friends or our family rebuild joy in their lives if we only point out the awful things that are happening in the world. We can't spread the gospel, a message of hope, if we're unable to share joy. We need to share joy and we need to spread joy. You know, I'm sure you could all think of at least one person in your life who could do with hearing something joyful. I'm sure we could all think of someone in our lives that needs to hear that they are loved just the way they are. So my second challenge to you this week is to do something to share joy. And maybe that looks like buying a colleague a cup of coffee, baking something for your neighbor, or helping out a friend with something, or posting something positive on social media. Whatever it looks like for you, I want to encourage you to share joy. So to recap, I believe that we can start to rebuild joy in our lives by firstly taking steps to come back to the source of joy, and secondly, sharing joy. You know, I wonder how different our world would look if we decided to come back to the source of true joy. I wonder how different our lives would look if we decided to maintain a posture of joy through the difficult times. You know, I believe that if we decided to rebuild joy in our lives, we would come out of any storm that we might face stronger than ever. I believe that if we focused on rebuilding joy, we would be able to enact true and lasting change in our society. I believe if we decided to focus on sharing joy, then we would see more and more people come to know Jesus. I'd love to pray for everyone right now. Dear God, I want to thank you that you are indeed our source of true joy. I want to thank you for what you are doing in our lives, regardless of the circumstance that we might find ourselves in. Lord, I thank you that your word says that we can be strengthened and empowered through you. Lord, that we can go through the impossible because you are on our side. And right now, I just want to pray for anyone who's watching this that might be feeling like everything is impossible. They might have lost their joy in life completely. I pray that that joy comes back to them. I pray that they come back to you and experience joy that is full, complete, and perfect. In your mighty name, I pray. Amen.